So I had full intention of going outside today and shooting a video on how we have improved our garden soil over the years and made it better and what amendments we've used. And then this happened. So yes, it's May 9th. Yes, we just got snow and this is totally normal. There's really no sense complaining about it. That's just how we roll in Wyoming. But hey, I figured this is perfect timing. So let's talk about how you can garden in a cold climate. So as many of you know, our homestead is in southeast Wyoming and we are in garden zone 5. And I guess it could be worse, you know, we don't live in Alaska, but it's really not a super easy place to garden. We generally put our cold sensitive plants in around Memorial Day or the first week of June, and we can have frosts as early as September sometimes. We kind of have to be prepared to have the most important things done by the middle of September. So that doesn't leave us very much time at all to grow our vegetables for the year. I've had a lot of questions from you guys via email or messages, and you're wondering how you can garden in a less than ideal climate, and I want to encourage you that it can be done. It just takes a little bit more considerations and just a few little tips that I want to share with you today. So first tip, and it kind of goes without saying, but you really need to know your area. So know your zone, know what thrives and doesn't thrive in your area, understand your first and last frost dates, and really get familiar with that. Because if you are in a cold climate like we are and your window is small, you really got to maximize that window as much as possible. Another part of that is picking the right sort of seeds and plants. So when I go through my seed catalog, when I order in January usually, I really pay attention to, at the top they designate how many days it takes to maturity. So I pick the varieties of beans or peas or whatever that are going to take the shortest amount of time to get to maturity, and that way I have the best chance of getting a harvest before the frost hits. Also, a really big part of gardening for us, and I'm sure for many of you, even if you're in a less harsh climate than I am, is really maximizing starting seeds indoors. There's a lot of things I cannot plant out here in the soil directly, but that's true for most areas. So I've gotten a little bit better over the years at starting seeds and getting my grow light set up really honed in so it's not a lot of stress, not a lot of hassle, and I can easily start several hundred seedlings in my basement on any given year. It saves me money and it makes sure I have a wider availability of vegetables that I wouldn't have if I was only putting things direct in the soil. I have a whole video on how we set up our seed starting equipment and I'll post that link below. One topic that always comes up as far as cold climate gardening goes is using season extenders or things like greenhouses, hoop houses, cold frames, etc. And I think that's something very much worth looking into if you live in a more harsh climate like we do. To be honest, we haven't gone that route yet. We've toyed for years now with the idea of building some sort of greenhouse. Now that we have our raised beds, we've thought about how we can make little hoops that go over the top and maybe put some plastic on them just to warm things up a little faster. We haven't gone there yet, and we probably will in the near future. For us, it's been an issue of cost and return on investment. So, you know, asking ourselves for what it would cost to build a greenhouse, and I've explained before with our hail and our wind and our snow here, we'd have to have a super rugged greenhouse that's not going to be cheap. So it's asking ourselves the time and the investment of building the greenhouse, is it worth having an extra little bit of time to grow? And then to be honest, sometimes like in the fall, I don't want to extend the season. I kind of want to be done. Kind of in my homestead hierarchy of love, it goes animals, cooking and kitchen stuff, and then gardening's kind of third on the list, which I don't know, that might shock some of you. But by the time October rolls around, I kind of just want to put the garden to bed for the year, and I'm not really super keen on figuring out how to creatively extend the growing season into the snow or into the cooler weather. So that's just me, but if you are a diehard and you want to garden all year, absolutely look into cold frames, hoop houses, and all that good stuff. So one thing we've done that I think does help our cold climate gardening a little bit is the raised beds. Now, This really wasn't the only reason we put in the beds. There was lots of other reasons we built these, and I talk about that on several blog posts on theprairiehomestead.com, so you can look at those if you're interested. But one thing raised beds can do is heat up the soil a little faster, and that's always the issue for us, is cold soil. You know, even if we don't get a frost in mid to late May, the soil just isn't warm. And I've experimented with planting things like greens or peas or things like that into the soil, you know, the first week or two of May, just to see what would happen. And even if we don't get snow, they just don't come up because the soil isn't warm enough yet. And so when you do put in raised beds, they can increase the temperature of your soil a little bit, and it might give you just enough of a leg up that it helps you get things started a little bit sooner. So one of my very best tips that I've learned kind of more recently is to really pay attention to where you're getting your plants from if you live in a cold climate. For years, you know, we don't have a lot of options in our neighboring towns, so I would really lean heavily on the big box stores like Lowe's and Home Depot to get a lot of my plants. And I realized that last year, after talking to some gardening experts, that you're going to be much better off going with a local gardening store that understands your area. You know, Lowe's and Home Depot are getting plants that are rated for zone 5, which we are in, but there's different variations in zone 5. And if I go with a local gardening stores, they know to get the plants that are rated for our type of zone 5, and they're way more knowledgeable in helping you understand what's going to thrive and what's not. Now, this right here, this is a currant bush, and this is a really good example. You know, when I go to Lowe's and get zone 5, you know, they'll be selling fruit trees and berries and things, and they've never done very well. Last year I started exploring, maybe the year before, I started exploring currants a little bit and talking to folks, and I realized these guys are really designed to live in these harsh prairie climates, and this is something that has been around forever. You know, the settlers were harvesting currants and using currants because this thing is hard to kill, which is exactly what I need. And sure enough, like, this little guy started blooming in April. It's super happy. You know, not much else has really come alive yet, or it's very slow, but this one was the first to get leaves on it. Super happy. And so understanding what type of plants are going to thrive and really leaning on your local experts. Look at your extension office, look at local gardening stores, talk to people who've been in this area a long time, and just don't trust the labels on your big box plants. Really take it that extra layer, and I think it's going to really pay off in the long run. Another example of where we did this was in our tree row. Now, I know tree rows are different than gardens, but instead of just going to a store and buying trees, we worked with some local tree experts to find the right varieties of things to put in our tree row, because even out here, you know, we have a different climate than they do in the town 40 miles away. We have way more wind, it's way more harsh, there's not as much shelter. So they were able to really help us pinpoint, yeah, this bush or this tree is not going to like your house, or this one is, and that's paid off big time in, you know, not spending a lot of money on stuff that's just going to die the first year. We have Austrian and ponderosa pine. And then over here we have native plums, lilacs, and then some cottonwood and ash trees mixed along there in the back. They're slower to mature, but they'll provide really nice protection in years to come. All right, so drop a comment below. First off, tell me what zone you're in if you know it, and then what your biggest issue is with gardening in your zone. One more little tip. As you're planning out your gardens and your plantings in your yard or around your homestead, take in mind the places you have some shelter. So this is a little herb garden we have up against the house, and this area is way more sheltered than the other garden is in terms of wind, and it kind of captures the southern light against the house, and it's just a slight bit warmer than other areas of the yard. And so this is an area where I've always put in raspberries or things that are a little more tender. You know, I'm still getting plants that are rated for zone 5, but anything that needs a little extra TLC and not quite so harsh, it can go here, because it's just going to be a little more protected. Our wind usually comes out of the northwest, which is that way, so it just shelters it. So if I can garden in the wide open, windy, hail-prone prairie of southeast Wyoming, you guys, pretty sure you can do it where you're at with just a few extra considerations. It might take a little more effort than someone living in the deep south who has a long growing season and little frost, but hey, we can do hard things, and it is worth the effort, I promise. So one of the hardest parts about living in an area with a late spring is getting the gardening bug, you know, mid-April, and not being able to really do much out here till end of May. So what have I been doing? to quell my spring fever, well, we have put fresh soil in some of the beds that were getting a little compacted. I'll be testing the soil. We've dug up some of the beds and kind of fluffed everything up. We're gonna be putting some fresh mulch in the pathways. So there's lots to do, you know, clearing out dead growth, things like that. I did get a chance to get some of my onion sets in before it snowed. I have about a bed and a half full, so I need to get some more to finish that out. But onions and things like that are always really good for early planting. It's pretty hard to kill them.